I'll admit it stung. Not the lie, the speed. How fast people I'd fed at this very table chose the louder story. But I noticed something else too. In every single call, the same detail kept surfacing. The cabin, the house, the rentals, the equity, not my health, the real estate. Concern, it turns out, has a price tag if you read it close enough. And somewhere out there, someone was writing the incidents down. Dates, times, a tidy little file. I just didn't know yet who was holding the pen. I found out who held the pen on a Tuesday at the hardware store. I'd gone in for stovepipe cement and a new damper handle, partly because I needed them, partly because I'd already started thinking like my own lawyer. If anyone ever stood in a courtroom and claimed I couldn't keep up my own wood stove, I wanted a dated receipt showing I'd maintained it myself. You learn to build your record before you need it. By the time you need it, it's too late to start. I was down the plumbing aisle when I heard Garrett's voice 2 rows over, on speaker, not bothering to lower it. No, the capacity angle is cleaner than the financial one, he was saying. If we go through the court on competency, the house just follows. We don't have to fight her for any of it. A second voice answered, oily, smooth, confident. Trust me, I've done a dozen of these. Families united, doctor signs off, judge does the rest. We're just formalizing what the family already sees. And the cabin she listed, Garrett said. Tanager Cove. A confused old woman trying to sell a property that isn't even hers, that helps us, doesn't it? That's the picture we want. That's exactly the picture. I stood very still by the pipe fittings, holding a damper handle in my hand, and I felt something in me go from warm to cold and stay there. When Garrett rounded the end of the aisle, he nearly ran his cart into mine. Beside him walked a tall man in a blazer the color of a road cone, a lanyard around his neck. Sloan DeVuro, Senior Transition Specialist, the badge read. Realtor, the suit said. Della, Garrett recovered fast. Funny running into you. Hilarious, I said. Sloan put out a hand like we were old friends. Mrs. Hawthorne, I help families through these difficult seasons. I'd love to just sit down and listen. You'd love to list my house, I said. His smile didn't so much as flicker. That's how I knew he was good at this. A man whose smile survives the truth is a man who's heard it before and decided it doesn't pay. Renata wanted the cabin emptied. Garrett wanted the equity. But this man turned other people's grief and worry into commission, and he'd done it a dozen times before without losing a night's sleep. He was the most honest one in the whole scheme, in a way. At least he didn't pretend it was love. Think about your family, Sloan said, soft as a closing pitch. I said, constantly. I rolled my cart to the register. I paid for my damper handle and my stovepipe cement, and I kept the receipt, and I drove home with my hands perfectly steady on the wheel. But inside, something had gone very quiet and very clear. The kind of quiet I used to feel right before I closed a hard deal, when all the noise falls away and there's nothing left but the paper and the names on it. They wanted a record. Fine, I would build one they could not break. My name is Della Hawthorne, and at 71 my daughter decided I'd lived alone long enough. She didn't ask me. She booked the tour first. We were at Sunday brunch, biscuits, sweet tea, the cloth napkins she only brings out when she wants something, when she slid a glossy folder across the table and smiled like she was handing me a present. We found a beautiful place for you, Mama. Assisted living. You'll love the mountain views. Her husband nodded along, thumbing his watch like the matter was already settled. Here's the thing they were all so sure about that morning, whose house was whose. They were wrong. And that brochure wasn't even the worst thing in my daughter's bag. I set down my coffee. I let the table go quiet. Then I said one calm sentence that pulled the floor out from under every plan they'd made without me. Welcome back to Beatrice's Quiet Tales, where the people the world quietly writes off find their footing and their voice again. I'm Beatrice. Tonight's story comes from a woman named Della, who wrote to me about the Sunday her family tried to vote her out of her own life, and what she'd been keeping in an old tackle box for 15 years. If a piece of this sounds like your own, you're exactly who I'm telling it for. Drop a comment, tell me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe. Here's Della's story, in her own words. Let me tell you who I am, so the rest lands the way it should. I worked title and escrow for 26 years up here in Asheville, closings, deeds, signatures, the small print other people skim. I read fine print for a living and I was good at it. My husband, Ray, passed when I was 50. No warning. One Thursday he was splitting firewood out back, and by Saturday I was a widow with a mortgage and half an income. This is the part where most people picture a frail little thing in a cardigan. Let me fix that picture before we go on. I closed my first deal alone 3 weeks after we buried Ray. A young couple, their first house, both of them terrified of the paperwork the way people are terrified of a language they don't speak. The husband kept asking me to slow down, to explain it twice. I did. I always did, because I'd just learned, in the hardest week of my life, exactly what it feels like to sign something you don't fully understand while the people across the table are in a hurry. That's the whole secret of a good closer, if you want to know it. It isn't being clever. It's refusing to be rushed. 26 years I sat at that desk and watched homes and futures and whole families change hands on a single signature, and the one thing I'd stake my life on is this. The person who stays calm while everyone else wants to hurry is the person who walks out owning the room. I'd nearly forgotten I knew that. For 15 years, with my own family, I let myself forget. They were about to remind me. So I built the rest of my life myself. I went full-time at the closing desk. I saved every loose dollar. I bought one small rental cabin up near the lake, then a second, and I paid this house off the year I turned 61. People assume a quiet woman is a simple one. My own family made that assumption for years. Lately they'd taken to talking about me in those soft, careful voices. Mama's slowing down. Mama forgets things. I don't forget things. I stopped explaining myself a long time ago to people who'd already made up their minds. Ray used to say I had a closer's patience. Watch, wait, sign last. I kept a motto taped over my desk for 2 decades. Title doesn't care who sleeps in the house. It cares whose name it carries. I never thought I'd need that old line at my own brunch table. But the daughter sliding me Mountain View photos didn't know which mountain views were already mine. And I had spent 15 years saying nothing about it, telling myself silence would be understood, that love explains itself. That was my mistake, not pride, not weakness. I trusted quiet to do a job that only words can do. The brunch was Renata's idea, which should have been my first warning. My daughter does not organize family gatherings. She arrives at them late, with a reason she has to leave early. So when she picked the restaurant and the hour, I noticed. We sat in the back corner of a place called the Millstone, the old grist mill down by the river that somebody turned into a restaurant. Renata and her husband Garrett on one side, my granddaughter Junie beside me, my oldest friend Lorraine on the end. I'd invited Lorraine. Renata hadn't loved that. You don't bring an extra set of ears to a closing you've already scripted. Renata was warmer than usual that morning. She touched my hand twice. She asked about my blood pressure, my knees, whether the stairs at the house were getting to be too much. Garrett kept glancing at the leather satchel by Renata's feet, not at his phone, at the bag. "You look tired, Mama," Renata said, smiling. "Doesn't she look tired?" "I look 71, I said. "It's going around." Junie laughed into her orange juice. She was the only one at that table who'd hugged me like she meant it. She's 21 now, my granddaughter, works at the library, still calls me on Sunday nights just to talk, which is more than I can say for anyone else with my blood in their veins. She was watching her mother that morning the way you watch whether you don't trust. Garrett ordered for everyone without asking. Renata complimented my sweater, then complimented it again, which is what she does right before she wants something. Lorraine caught my eye over the bread basket. She'd watched 100 deals go sideways in her years too. She knew the look of a table being set for something nobody told you about. I sipped my water. I let them warm me up. My daughter only smiles like that when she's already decided to take the thing she's about to ask for, and her hand kept drifting back toward that satchel on the floor. She waited until the plates were cleared. Closers do that too. "Mama, Garrett and I have been worried about you," she said, "really worried." Then she reached into the bag. The brochure was heavy, glossy, expensive. Cedar Hollow Senior Living. A photo of a silver-haired woman laughing at a pottery wheel she would never actually sit at. Renata slid it across the linen. "We toured a beautiful place for you. Assisted living. You'll love the mountain views." "You toured it," I said, "without me." "We didn't want to overwhelm you," Garrett said smoothly. "It's safer. Staff around the clock. No more stairs, no more wood stove to worry about. It's $5,800 a month, I said. I'd read the fine print upside down while she slid it over. Reading upside down is a skill you pick up at a closing desk. The client's copy always faces away from you, and you learn to take it in anyway. Who's paying that exactly? Renata's smile tightened a half-inch. We'd figure out the house. Sell it, downsize you. It just makes sense, Mama. There it was, sell the house, my house. You've been falling, Renata pressed. You left the wood stove damper open last month, smoke all through the kitchen. I have never once left that damper open in 40 years. See, that's the thing. She lowered her voice for the whole table to hear. It's time, Mama. You can't be trusted on your own anymore. The word trusted landed on the table like a dropped fork. Junie went still beside me. Lorraine set her coffee down very slowly. Garrett slid a packet halfway out of his folder, the move you make when you think the signature's already coming. They weren't worried. Worry doesn't tour. Worry doesn't price the house. Worry doesn't bring the paperwork to brunch. This was a plan dressed up as love, and they'd rehearsed it. So I did what I do best. I looked at the brochure. I looked at my daughter. And I picked up my coffee because the next thing I said deserved a clean, steady voice. I took my time. I drank. I set the cup back in its saucer without a sound. That's a lovely brochure, I said. Very glossy. Renata started to speak. I let it land first. I toured the lake cabin Tuesday myself, the one you've been calling yours. It's listed for sale. For a second, nobody moved. Renata's fork hit the plate, a small sound, and an enormous one. What? She said. The cabin on Tanager Cove, I repeated, pleasant as Sunday. The one you and Garrett spend your summers in. I toured it Tuesday. The photographer came Wednesday. It went on the market this morning. That's not funny. Renata laughed, but it cracked in the middle. You can't list my cabin, she said. Except I hadn't said it like a question, and she'd answered like it was one. Garrett's smooth face did something it hadn't done all morning. It calculated. I watched him run the math behind his eyes and not like the total at the bottom. She's confused, he said to Renata quietly, as if I weren't sitting 18 inches away. Della, you're getting confused. I closed more cabins, houses, and lots than you've ever set foot in, Garrett. I folded my napkin into a neat square. I'm not confused, I'm prepared. Lorraine's mouth twitched. Junie had stopped breathing. I didn't explain. I didn't say one word about deeds or names or what I'd signed 15 years ago. Let them sit in it. That's the other thing escrow teaches you. The silence after a fact does more work than the fact itself. People rush to fill a silence, and what they fill it with tells you everything. Renata reached for her phone, then put it down, then picked it up again. You're bluffing, she said. She still thought it was a bluff. She'd keep thinking that for about another week, right up until a stranger wanted to walk through her kitchen on a Saturday morning. I picked up the dessert menu like the conversation was over. The blackberry cobbler here is wonderful, I said. Shall we? Renata did not want the cobbler. This is insane, she hissed. You can't just mama look at me. This right here proves it. This is exactly the kind of thing we're talking about. What thing? This, erratic, threatening to sell things, you sound paranoid. And there it is, that's the move. When the quiet woman finally speaks, they call it a symptom. I sound like someone who reads her own mail, I said. Garrett leaned in, voice gentle as a salesman's. Della, nobody's the enemy here. We love you. We're trying to protect you from the stairs, from the stove, from yourself. Lorraine made a small sound, the kind a person makes when they've just decided to remember every word of this later. Good. I'd wanted a witness, and I'd brought one. Junie's eyes were shining. Grandma's not paranoid, she said. She's the sharpest person at this table. Stay out of it, Junie, Renata snapped. I put 2 20s under my water glass for the staff and slid out of the booth slowly, deliberately, on my own 2 feet. We'll talk when you're ready to listen, I said. Right now you're only ready to win. Mama, sit down. People are looking. Let them. I picked up my purse. I've spent 15 years being the one who sits down quietly. I'm done with that chair. I walked out past the hostess stand, past a couple at the front table who'd stopped chewing to watch. The bell over the door rang behind me. I didn't slam it. I didn't cry in the car. I just sat a moment with my hands steady on the wheel and let one question settle. How does a mother end up owning the cabin her daughter calls home and never once tell her why? The answer was in an old tackle box on my kitchen counter. And by the end of the month, every person at that brunch table was going to learn what was inside it. I drove home the long way, past the turn for Tanager Cove, where the for sale sign was already staked in the gravel by the mailbox. My name on the listing, not hers. At home, I set the cedar hollow brochure face down on the kitchen counter. I didn't throw it out. I wanted to remember exactly what they thought I was. Then I opened the cabinet over the refrigerator where I keep my papers, and I took down Ray's old tackle box. It had been his father's before him, dented green metal, the latch worn soft, still smelling faintly of cut bait and machine oil 30 years on. Ray kept hooks and spinners and a little jar of split shot in it. I keep the architecture of my whole quiet life. His death certificate, the deed to this house, the rental papers, and one manila envelope I'd folded shut 15 years ago and never opened again. I didn't open it that night either. I just held it on my lap a while, at the kitchen table, the way you'd hold a sleeping cat you don't want to wake. You should know how the cabin happened, because it matters. It's the whole heart of this, really. Everything else is just paper. 15 years ago, Renata's first marriage came apart in the ugliest way there is. Her husband, Junie's father, drained their accounts over a single weekend and went after everything she had left, including the little place she was trying to hold on to so that Junie, 6 years old then, scared, sleeping with the hall light on, would have a bed that stayed put. I remember the night she called me. 11 o'clock, her voice gone flat the way a voice goes when a person has cried themselves past crying. "Mama," she said, "he's taking the house. The lawyer says he can. I don't know where we're going to go." I was at her door by midnight. I sat on the floor of a half-emptied apartment with my granddaughter asleep against my shoulder, and I made my daughter a promise I intended to keep with paperwork, because paperwork is the only promise the world actually honors. So I stepped in. I bought the cabin on Tanager Cove. I put it in my name on purpose so no lawyer of his could ever reach it, so that whatever a court took from Renata, it could never take the roof I'd put over Junie's head. And I let Renata use it for a rent that started as a token and drifted, over the years, down to nothing. Summers, holidays, long weekends, it became their place. The place Junie learned to swim off the dock. The place they hung stockings. I never made Renata sign a thank you. I never reminded her. I thought love was clearer when you didn't keep a receipt. That was the silence I told you about. I let her come to believe the cabin was simply hers, the way children believe the porch light comes on by magic, never once wondering who's paying the bill in the dark. I'd kept that envelope folded for 15 years. By the end of the month, my whole family would learn what was inside it and why I'd really held on to it. But first, they were going to try to convince the world I was losing my mind. If you've ever been the quiet one in the family, the one everyone assumes will just go along, I see you. This is the part where I stopped going along. Stay with me. It only gets clearer from here. The text started that night. "Renata, Mama, I'm scared for you. You're confused and you won't admit it. Renata, please let us help before you hurt yourself. Renata, I already called Theo. He agrees with me. Theo is my son. 48, 2 states away in Tennessee, allergic to conflict since the day he was born. If Renata had called him, it wasn't to ask a question. It was to build a chorus." My phone buzzed again at 11. Again at midnight. I didn't answer. I made tea. I read every message twice, the way I used to read a contract. Not for the feeling, for the structure. And the structure told me something cold. This wasn't a daughter panicking. Panic is messy. This was tidy. Confused, hurt yourself. Theo agrees. Those weren't a mother's frightened words. Those were exhibits, lined up in order, the way you stack them before a hearing. She wasn't venting at me. She was documenting me. I'd watched it happen to a client once, years back. A son who wanted control of his father's accounts started a quiet paper trail, a misplaced bill here, a confused phone call there, each one written down with a date. By the time anyone looked closely, the old man had a file 3 inches thick describing a decline that had never actually happened. The father was sharp as a tack right up to the end. It didn't matter. On paper, he was already gone. I set my phone down beside the face-down brochure. Garden photos on one side of the counter, a campaign on the other. Same morning, same hand. They didn't want me safe, they wanted me declared. I rinsed my cup, dried it, put it away. Then I sat at the kitchen table and started doing the thing I'd told myself for 15 years I'd never have to do. I started getting ready. Because if my daughter wanted a record, I'd make sure mine was the one that held up in a room. By Sunday, the phone calls began. Not from Renata, from the cousins. My niece Paige called first, syrupy with concern. "Aunt Della, we just want what's best. Renata says you've been struggling." Struggling with what? The stove, the falling, the scene at brunch. I didn't fall, I left a restaurant. Renata said you threatened to put her out on the street. There it was already, polished into a story. I'd threatened, I was unstable. The woman who paid off her own house at 61 had become, overnight, a danger to herself. "Paige," I said, "did Renata happen to mention who owns that cabin on Tanager Cove?" A pause, she said it's hers. "Did she?" I hung up gently. Then my cousin Earl called, and that one nearly got to me, so I want to tell you about it. Earl, I'd driven 2 hours to sit with the week his wife passed. He'd eaten at this table more Thanksgivings than I could count. He didn't start syrupy like the others. He started kind, which was worse. "Della," he said, "I'm not calling to gang up. I just worry about you, out there alone with the wood stove and all those stairs. Maybe Renata's got a point. Maybe somewhere with people around wouldn't be the worst thing." And for one moment, I'll be honest with you, I felt my certainty wobble, because it wasn't an enemy talking. It was someone who loved me, repeating an enemy's words without knowing whose they were. That's how these things work. They don't recruit the cruel. They recruit the kind and let the kind do the damage for them. "Earl," I said, "when's the last time you came up here and saw the stove for yourself?" A silence. "That's what I thought," I said gently. "You're describing a woman you haven't visited. Renata painted her for you. Come see the real one any Sunday you like. The coffee's always on." He went quiet, and then he said, "I'll do that," and I believe he meant it. But I noticed he hadn't called to ask how I was. He'd called to confirm a verdict he'd already half accepted. Then a woman from my church, gently asking whether I'd thought about getting evaluated. That word again, evaluated. I understood exactly what was happening. Renata wasn't just talking about me. She was assembling a jury, one phone call at a time, so that when the real move came, everyone would already believe the verdict before they walked in the room. "Everyone agrees you're slipping, Mama," she texted that evening. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, everyone." As if a person could be voted out of her own mind. Sunday came up cold and bright. The way mountain afternoons do in the fall, that hard blue sky that makes everything look honest whether it is or not. I cleaned the house, not because they deserved it, but because I wanted them surrounded by the evidence of a woman who runs her own life just fine. Floors swept, wood stove cold and spotless, the damper handle I'd installed myself working smooth as silk. I baked. I set the good cookies out on Ray's mother's plate. I made a full pot of coffee, the real kind, and put out the cream in the little pitcher. And on the side table by my armchair, I set the tackle box. Lid closed. At 1:55, a car pulled into the drive, then another, then a third. Doors slammed. Voices carried up the walk, already rehearsing their gentleness. Junie arrived early and slipped to the window, just like I'd asked. Lorraine took the chair at the end of the sofa, a notebook open in her lap. The doorbell rang, in my own house. The house I'd paid off myself at 61, the house they'd come to take. I picked up the tackle box, and I went to let my family in. They filled my living room like they owned it. Renata, Garrett, my son Theo, down from Tennessee, looking at the floor like it might open and spare him. 4 cousins, 2 women from my church. And Sloan DeVuro in a blazer the exact orange of a hunting vest, a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. I poured coffee, I offered the good cookies. I let them all get comfortable in my chairs. "Mama, sit down," Renata said, and she lowered herself into my armchair, the one by the window, the one that's been mine for 30 years. "We need to talk." I sat on the sofa instead, tackle box beside me, lid closed. Lorraine at the end. Junie at the window, still as a held breath. "Of course," I said, "let's talk." Sloan led naturally. The gentle, practiced voice, the leather portfolio, the fountain pen laid out where I couldn't miss it. Mrs. Hawthorne, your family loves you very much. They're concerned about your safety and your judgment. He opened the portfolio and slid 2 documents across my coffee table, toward the pen. We've prepared some paperwork, just to make everything easier. A voluntary transition agreement and a healthcare authorization. We only need your signature, and we can all stop worrying. Sign it, Mama, Renata said. Her voice wobbled between command and plea. Please, before this gets ugly. And if I don't? I asked. Garrett spoke for the first time, flat and cold. Then we let a judge decide whether you're fit to be making these decisions at all. The room went quiet. They thought the quiet meant they'd won. It's for the best, Della, one of the cousins murmured. Theo studied the carpet like it owed him money. I looked at the papers. I looked at the pen, laid so helpfully across them, pointing toward the rest of my life in a building with a pottery class I'd never sit at. I'm not signing anything today, I said. My hand didn't shake. I noticed that, almost with wonder, after 15 years of going along, the one time it mattered most, my hand was perfectly still. Mama. But since everyone came all this way, I said, let's make a loving plan together. Everyone's here. Let's do it properly. And I rested my hand on the lid of the tackle box. Before I open this, I said, I want to be fair. Every person in this room got one version of the story, Renata's. You all answered her email. You all drove up here to help me see reason. Heads nodded, uncertain now. So I'm going to give you the other version, not shouted, not in an email, right here where you can see it with your own eyes and decide for yourselves. Mama, don't make a scene, Renata said. This isn't a scene, sweetheart. I let the smallest smile reach my mouth. It's a closing. I've done thousands. They're very calm. Sloane shifted in his orange blazer. Mrs. Hawthorne, I really don't think. You're a guest in my home, Mr. Devereux, I said, not unkindly. You'll get your turn to talk when I'm in the market to buy something. A cousin snorted a laugh, then caught herself. Lorraine, I said, you were at the brunch. You heard what was said. Every word, Lorraine said, lifting her notebook. I wrote it down that same night. And Junie's been close to this family her whole life. She's seen things up close. Junie nodded once, steady at the window. I felt the room tilt, just slightly. The jury Renata had spent 2 weeks assembling was no longer certain which way the verdict ran. That's the thing about a borrowed audience. The moment a calmer, clearer story sits down, the crowd quietly switches sides, and they never once tell the loud one they've gone. I opened the tackle box. The old hinge creaked in a silent room. You all think this is about a house, I said. It isn't. It's about a word, trusted. My daughter said I can't be trusted on my own, so let's talk about trust. I looked at Renata. 15 years ago, your first husband emptied your accounts over a weekend and came after everything you had left. You stood in a doorway with Junie on your hip and nowhere to go. Renata's face changed. She had not expected the past to walk into this room. Who showed up? I asked quietly. Who made sure that man could never touch the roof over your daughter's head? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Everyone there already knew. I'm not saying it to shame you, I said. I'm saying it because you once stood in a safe doorway I built, and 15 years later, you used the very same kind of paperwork to try to lock me out of mine. The cousins were very still now. The church women looked at their hands. Junie had tears on her face at the window. She remembered that doorway. She'd been 3. Theo finally lifted his head and looked at me. Too late, but he looked. I loved you all the quiet way, I said. No receipts, no reminders. I thought that was the higher kind of love. I was wrong about that. Quiet love lets people forget where the floor under their feet came from. I lifted out the first document. Before I could lay it down, Garrett made his move. The cornered ones always do. He stood up, reached into his bag, and dropped the Cedar Hollow brochure onto the coffee table, right on top of my document, covering it like he could bury paper under a picture. The same glossy folder, the silver-haired woman, the pottery wheel, the mountain views. And clipped to it now, the Cedar Hollow admission form, my name already typed across the top. This is the responsible plan, Garrett announced to the room, loud, performing for the cousins. A safe place, professional care. We've already reserved her room for the first of the month. He tapped the form. All we need is a signature. Hers or the court's, we'd all rather it be hers. A church woman murmured approval. Renata nodded, gathering the cousins' faces back to her side. For a moment the brochure sat on top of my deed, the lie on top of the truth, and the room leaned toward the brighter picture, the way rooms do. I let it sit there. I didn't snatch it away. Snatching looks like panic, and panic was their whole story about me. Instead, I picked the brochure up with 2 fingers, the way you lift something you're handing back, and I read the price aloud. $5,800 a month, I said. For me, funded by selling my house. I set it back down, face up, beside the deed, not over it. Let's leave that right there. A picture of where they'd like me to be. Now let me show you the paperwork they hoped I'd never read. I'll admit it stung. Not the lie, the speed. How fast people I'd fed at this very table chose the louder story. But I noticed something else too. In every single call, the same detail kept surfacing. The cabin, the house, the rentals, the equity, not my health, the real estate. Concern, it turns out, has a price tag if you read it close enough. And somewhere out there, someone was writing the incidents down. Dates, times, a tidy little file. I just didn't know yet who was holding the pen. I found out who held the pen on a Tuesday at the hardware store. I'd gone in for stovepipe cement and a new damper handle, partly because I needed them, partly because I'd already started thinking like my own lawyer. If anyone ever stood in a courtroom and claimed I couldn't keep up my own wood stove, I wanted a dated receipt showing I'd maintained it myself. You learn to build your record before you need it. By the time you need it, it's too late to start. I was down the plumbing aisle when I heard Garrett's voice 2 rows over, on speaker, not bothering to lower it. No, the capacity angle is cleaner than the financial one, he was saying. If we go through the court on competency, the house just follows. We don't have to fight her for any of it. A second voice answered, oily, smooth, confident. Trust me, I've done a dozen of these. Families united, doctor signs off, judge does the rest. We're just formalizing what the family already sees. And the cabin she listed, Garrett said. Tanager Cove. A confused old woman trying to sell a property that isn't even hers, that helps us, doesn't it? That's the picture we want. That's exactly the picture. I stood very still by the pipe fittings, holding a damper handle in my hand, and I felt something in me go from warm to cold and stay there. When Garrett rounded the end of the aisle, he nearly ran his cart into mine. Beside him walked a tall man in a blazer the color of a road cone, a lanyard around his neck. Sloan DeVuro, Senior Transition Specialist, the badge read. Realtor, the suit said. Della, Garrett recovered fast, funny running into you. Hilarious, I said. Sloan put out a hand like we were old friends. Mrs. Hawthorne, I help families through these difficult seasons. I'd love to just sit down and listen. You'd love to list my house, I said. His smile didn't so much as flicker. That's how I knew he was good at this. A man whose smile survives the truth is a man who's heard it before and decided it doesn't pay. Renata wanted the cabin emptied. Garrett wanted the equity. But this man turned other people's grief and worry into commission, and he'd done it a dozen times before without losing a night's sleep. He was the most honest one in the whole scheme, in a way. At least he didn't pretend it was love. Think about your family, Sloan said, soft as a closing pitch. I said, constantly. I rolled my cart to the register. I paid for my damper handle and my stovepipe cement, and I kept the receipt, and I drove home with my hands perfectly steady on the wheel. But inside, something had gone very quiet and very clear. The kind of quiet I used to feel right before I closed a hard deal, when all the noise falls away and there's nothing left but the paper and the names on it. They wanted a record. Fine, I would build one they could not break. That night I didn't make tea, I made a list. Closers don't get angry. Anger is loud, and loud loses. Closers get organized. So I sat at the kitchen table under the good lamp and did what I'd done for 26 years for strangers and now had to do for myself. I wrote down every claim they'd made, left the damper open, falling, forgetting, listed a property that isn't hers, threatened her daughter. 5 lies lined up like exhibits, and beside each one I wrote what would answer it, not my word against theirs, but paper a judge couldn't wave away. The next morning, I started closing the file on my own life. First, the cabin. It was already listed, but I called my agent and told her to keep it clean and move fast. By Friday, she called back. Full price offer, a young couple relocating from Charlotte, cash heavy, quick close. A little boy, she mentioned, and a baby on the way. I told her yes. I'll tell you why that detail mattered to me later. Second, the deeds. I drove down to the county register and pulled certified copies of everything. This house, the cabin, both rental cabins up the lake. Everyone carried exactly one name. Mine. No second name, no transfer, not for a single day in 15 years. People who have decided you're slipping never think to check the public record. It's all sitting right there, for $2 a page. They'd built a whole campaign on a fact they never once bothered to verify. Third, and this is the one that mattered most, I called Dr. Acaffer's office and scheduled a full cognitive evaluation. Not because I doubted myself, because I knew exactly what a courtroom looks like, and I knew that the woman holding a clean neurological report from a board-certified physician is a woman no judge will declare incompetent. Garrett wanted a capacity case. I decided to walk into the room already holding the verdict. I spent 90 minutes with a neuropsychologist 3 days later. Memory, reasoning, attention, judgment, the clock drawing, the word lists, all of it. At the end, she set down her clipboard and smiled. "Mrs. Hawthorne," she said, "I should be so sharp at your age. Cognition intact across all domains, no impairment. Signed, dated, 11 days before everything came to a head." I sat in my car in that parking lot and laughed, just once, alone. Because the cruelty of it had a funny bottom to it. They'd spent weeks telling everyone I'd lost my mind, and the fastest way to prove I hadn't was simply to let a doctor check. Then I went to see a lawyer of my own, not the family's friendly Mr. Devereaux. A real one. Patris Mbeki, who handles trusts and estates and has the kind of calm that makes you feel sorry for whoever's sitting across from her. I told her the whole thing, start to finish. She listened without interrupting once, then set down her pen. "They've made one mistake," she said. "They started a paper trail. People who start paper trails always assume they're the only one who knows how to write. We built a trust. Every asset I owned, this house, the 3 cabins, the accounts, folded inside it, with rules the law would not let anyone reach around. I signed it 2 weeks before my family ever set foot in my living room to help me see reason. While Renata was choosing which room at Cedar Hollow had the better light, I was making it legally impossible for anyone to take my front door. "One more thing," Patris said as I gathered my coat. "When the day comes, and it will, don't argue with them. Don't raise your voice. Just lay the paper down, one piece at a time, and let it speak. The loudest person in the room is always the one with the weakest deed." I'd been doing exactly that for 26 years, but it helped to hear someone else say it. And there was still one thing left in the tackle box I hadn't faced, the envelope. I finally opened it that night. The manila envelope I'd folded shut 15 years ago and carried from cabinet to cabinet ever since without once breaking the seal. Inside was the original cabin deed. The canceled checks I'd written to buy it, my handwriting younger and rounder than it is now, and a single photograph I'd tucked in there and tried to forget. Renata at 25. Junie on her hip, maybe 3 years old, one little fist knotted in her mother's collar. The 2 of them standing in the doorway of the cabin on the very day I handed Renata the keys and told her she was safe now, that no man and no court could put her or her daughter out. She was crying in that photo, but the good kind, the kind that's grateful, the kind that hasn't yet learned to forget who built the doorway it's standing in. I sat at my kitchen table and looked at that picture for a long, long time. And I understood, finally, what the real closing was going to be. It wasn't the deed, it wasn't the trust, it wasn't even the doctor's letter, clean as it was. It was going to be that photograph, and the question of whether my daughter could look at the doorway I'd built her and still pretend she didn't know. I almost didn't bring it. There's a kind of weapon you don't want to fire even when you're in the right, because you know it'll leave a mark on you too. But I slid it back into the envelope, and the envelope back into Ray's tackle box, and I left it there. Some things you carry into the room and pray you won't have to use. I closed the latch. The old hinge creaked the way it always has. Then my phone lit up, and it was Junie, and her voice was shaking. "Grandma," she said, "I have to tell you something. Mom sent an email to everyone. There's a meeting at your house, Sunday." At my house, I repeated. Sunday afternoon. She's calling it a family meeting about your care. Grandma, there's a man coming, the one in the bright blazer. And there's papers. Garrett told Dad they just need you to sign one thing and it's done. And if I don't sign? A long pause. Then they go to a judge. Grandma, Mom's making me come. She says I have to be there to support the family. Her voice cracked clean in half. I don't want to support this. I was there. I remember the cabin. I remember you telling Mom we were safe. That stopped me. She'd been 3 years old, and somewhere down inside her, she'd kept it. Junie, I said, listen to me. I want you to come, but I don't want you to fight anyone, and I don't want you to choose sides at that table. I want you to do one thing, and it's the most powerful thing in the room. Stand by the window. Watch. Don't say a word unless you want to. Be a witness. A witness to what? To the truth, I said. Witnesses are the quietest people in any room, and nobody ever notices them, right up until the moment everything turns on what they saw. I let Renata's email do its work all week. I didn't fight it. I didn't call the cousins back to plead my case. Let them assemble. A jury you borrow with a lie, you cannot keep once a clearer story walks in and sits down. I'd learned that across 2 decades of closings. The room always leans toward the brighter picture, right up until the truer one lays its papers on the table. I made one call, to Lorraine. Sunday, I said, 2 o'clock, bring the notes you took at brunch. I wrote down every word that same night, she said. Della, are you all right? I'm a closer, Lorraine, I said. I've never been more all right in my life. I slid the deed out from under the brochure and held it up. Garrett, I said, you're about to learn the difference between a man who tore a property and a woman who owns one. Renata saw the deed coming and panicked the only way she knew how. She got louder. Don't listen to her, she said, on her feet now, turning to the cousins. This is exactly what I've been telling you. She gets fixated. She invents stories about owning things. She thinks she owns my cabin now. She laughed, sharp and brittle, sweeping a hand at me. Do you hear her? It's time, Mama. You can't be trusted on your own. This is why we're all here. The same words from the brunch table. And this time, the room didn't move with her. They looked at the steady woman on the sofa with a box of papers, and at the shaking woman standing in a borrowed armchair, and something quietly turned. Sit down, Renata, Theo said softly, his own sister. He couldn't bring himself to choose me out loud, but he couldn't stomach the sound of her anymore either. Stay out of it, she snapped at him. Honey, Lorraine said, in the tone you'd use on a child reaching toward a hot stove, you might want to hear this before you say one more thing. Sloan closed his portfolio. He'd done a dozen of these. He knew the exact sound a deal makes when it dies, and he had just heard it. Renata looked around the room for her jury, and found a row of people leaning away from her. Mama, she said, and now there was fear under the anger. What's in the box? I'd waited 15 years to be asked that question by someone who might be ready for the answer. She wasn't ready, but she was about to hear it anyway. Everything, I said, calm as still water. Let's start with your front door. I read the name on the deed out loud, level and clear. Tanager Cove Cabin, grantee Della M. Hawthorne, recorded 15 years ago, no transfers, no second name ever. Silence. That's the cabin my daughter has called hers for 15 summers, I said. It has never, not for one single day, been in her name. It's in mine, because I bought it the week her first marriage fell apart, so a man with a lawyer couldn't take the roof off her child's head. Renata's mouth opened. Nothing came out. I set the deed down and lifted the next page. This is the listing. Same cabin on the market legally by the owner, me. I laid it beside the deed. As of Friday, it has a buyer, full asking. They close on the 1st. A cousin gasped. Garrett sat down hard. I lifted the 3rd document. This is a full cognitive evaluation, dated 11 days ago, signed by a board-certified neuropsychologist. Cognition intact across all domains, no impairment. I looked at Sloan. Your capacity case is a single sheet of paper, Mr. Devereaux, so is mine. The difference is mine has a doctor's signature and yours has a sticky note. Then I reached for the green binder I'd asked Junie to bring down from the hall closet that morning. Garrett's binder, the one he'd left here 2 Thanksgivings ago and never collected, the one I'd finally opened that week and found exactly what I expected inside. Garrett went white. I won't read the whole thing, I said gently. But there's a note here in your handwriting, Garrett. Get her to sign voluntarily first cleaner. If not, capacity route by Oct 30. I closed the binder. You didn't tour a home for me. You scheduled a disappearance and you gave it a deadline. Then the last document, the trust. And in case anyone in this room is still doing math about my house, I said, every asset I own is now inside a trust the law will not let you touch. I signed it 2 weeks ago, while you were choosing which room had the better light. I folded my hands on top of the tackle box. You can't move someone, I said, who owns the room. Across the coffee table, my daughter stared at a deed with her own name nowhere on it, and the whole month collapsed in her eyes. Then I did the thing I dreaded most. I reached into the box for the photograph. Renata, I said, look at this before you say another word. I turned it around, her at 25, Junie on her hip, the doorway of the cabin the day they moved in safe. I bought that cabin so a man couldn't take the roof off your daughter's head. I put it in my name so no court of his could ever reach it. I never made you thank me. I never reminded you. I thought that was love. My voice didn't rise. I'd promised myself it wouldn't. You took the safety I built you, and you turned it into the blueprint for locking me away. I set the photo on the table, between the deed and the brochure. Concern is a gift, I said. You sent me a bill. Renata broke, but not the way you'd hope. You're punishing me, she screamed on her feet. You want your own daughter out on the street? After everything I do for you? She was crying, but it was the crying that demands, not the crying that's sorry. This is elder abuse. I'll sue you. I'll take you to a judge and tell them everything. Tell them, I said. I have a deed, a listing, a doctor's letter, and your husband's handwriting. Bring all of it to a judge, please. Garrett didn't yell. Garrett did worse. He picked up his folder, smoothed his jacket, and said, flat as a closed door, we'll see what my lawyer says. Then he walked out. No apology, just arithmetic. Sloan was already gone. I never even saw him leave, no commission, no case, no orange blazer at my door again. And Theo sat with his hands over his face and would not look at me. Not the shame that fixes anything, just shame. He'd had the whole morning to choose, and the whole room, and he'd let it pass twice. The cousins didn't say it's for the best anymore. The room had reached a new verdict. It just hadn't said it out loud yet. I stood up slowly, on my own 2 feet, in my own living room. Here's the loving plan, I said, since everyone drove up for one. The room went still. I'm staying in my home. That was never on the table, and it never will be. The cabin sells on the 1st. I won't be funding anyone's line of credit, and I won't be catching anyone who jumped on purpose. Renata made a wounded sound. I kept going, gentle and final. Renata, I love you. I will love you until the day I die. But I am done being the floor you stand on while you reach for my walls. The new owners get the keys on the 1st. You have until then to make your own arrangements. I'll help you carry the boxes. I won't help you skip the lesson. Mama, please. My door is open, I said. My deed is mine. Both of those are true, and you're going to have to learn to live with both. I looked at the cousins, at the 2 church women who'd answered an email about a stranger they hadn't bothered to call in a year. The coffee's still warm if anyone wants it, I said. Otherwise, I believe this meeting's adjourned. One by one, they gathered their coats. A few mumbled apologies on the way out, the embarrassed kind, the kind that comes too late to mean much but still counts for something. Lorraine stayed. Junie stayed. Renata was the last to leave, mascara ruined, looking back at me from the doorway, my doorway, with no idea she was standing in the exact spot from the photograph. She didn't recognize it. That, more than anything, told me I'd made the right call. I closed the door behind her. Not slammed, just shut with a steady hand. Then I sat down with my 2 witnesses, and for the first time in a month, the house was quiet because I'd chosen the quiet, not because I'd been told to hold my tongue. Here's how it landed. In the plain numbers I trust more than feelings. The Tanager Cove cabin closed on the 1st. Full price, clean. And here's the detail I told you I'd come back to, that young couple from Charlotte, the one with the little boy and the baby on the way. Their son sleeps now in the room where Junie learned to walk. A new family, safe under that roof. I can't tell you why, but that's the part that let me sleep at night. The cabin had been bought to keep a child safe 15 years ago, and on its way out of my hands, It did the very same thing one more time. Garrett's line of credit was Garrett's problem. Without my house to raid, they faced it the ordinary way, downsized to a rented place, in both their names, the lease as honest as anything they'd done all year. The guardianship petition was never filed. You don't bring a capacity case against a woman holding a clean evaluation. Sloane Devereaux knew it, which is exactly why Sloane Devereaux evaporated. No commission, no case, no blazer the color of a traffic cone at my door again. A handful of cousins called to apologize. Earl was the first, and he came up the next Sunday like he said he would, and saw the stove for himself, and sat at my table looking ashamed of every word he'd repeated. I accepted his apology. I also noticed who never called at all, and I'll carry that list quietly for the rest of my days. Theo emailed. 3 lines, he was sorry it got so heated. Not sorry he'd signed on, sorry it got loud. I wrote back 2 words, I know, we talk now. A little carefully, Renata sent a long message a week later. I only ever worried about you, Mama. I can't believe you do this to family. The manipulative kind. The kind with no apology anywhere inside it, only a fresh invoice. I read it once. I didn't write back. Some letters don't deserve a reply. Only a closed lid. Junie still calls every Sunday night. She came up for a whole weekend last month and we sat out on the porch with Coco and she asked me, quiet, Grandma, were you ever scared? That day? And I told her the truth. Only of one thing, I said, that I'd waited too long to speak and the speaking wouldn't matter anymore. She thought about that a while and then she said, it mattered. And it did. I took the cedar hollow brochure off my counter at last. I folded it once, slid it inside the old cabin listing sheet, the lie tucked inside the truth that beat it, and dropped them both in the recycling. Then I put the deed and the photograph back in Ray's tackle box, where the safe things live, and set it on the shelf. The hinge creaked shut the way it has my whole life. The house was mine. It always had been. That's Della's story. 1 brochure, 1 old tackle box, 1 steady no, I'm Beatrice. And if there's a single thing I'd hand you from Della tonight, it's this. Concern is a gift, not an invoice, not a verdict, and never a key to your mother's front door. The people who love you quietly are easy to forget. Don't be the one who forgets where the floor came from. And if you're the quiet one, the one everyone assumes will just go along, remember that the calmest voice in the room is usually the one holding the deed. If this story moved you, do one small thing this week. Check whose name is on what, and say the thank you've been meaning to say out loud. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next quiet tale.